I'll never forget the morning that boy walked into my courtroom. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look ashamed. He looked entitled, like the very walls of justice existed only to make room for his arrogance. His name was Derek Martinez, 21 years old, son of County Sheriff Robert Martinez. And before the next hour was over, he would look me in the eye and tell me I was powerless. But here's the truth I learned over 40 years on the bench. Real power doesn't come from badges, guns, or last names. It comes from doing what's right when it's hardest to do. That morning, I didn't know I was about to face one of the most dangerous forces in America, corruption disguised as family loyalty. And I didn't know that a lesson in justice was about to change a father, a son, and an entire county forever. It all began 2 nights earlier. A quiet Saturday on Maple Street, a peaceful neighborhood where families leave windows open and kids ride bikes until sunset. At 11:04 p.m., the silence shattered. A red pickup truck roared around a corner, jumped the curb, and obliterated Mrs. Henderson's brick mailbox. Bricks flew like shrapnel. The hydrant next to it nearly burst. When officers arrived, they found Derek Martinez stumbling out of the truck, his speech slurred, the smell of alcohol so strong it hit them before he spoke. He blew a .12 on the breathalyzer, well above the legal limit. A routine DUI arrest, or so it should have been. But nothing about the Martinez family was routine. The arresting officer, Sergeant Williams, was a man of principle, 15 years on the force, not a single corruption complaint. He followed protocol, read the rights, cuff the suspect, begin transport for booking. That's when Derek made a phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a friend, but to his father, the sheriff himself. "Dad," Derek said from the back of the patrol car, "these idiots arrested me. Fix this. Now." 20 minutes later, the flashing blue lights of the sheriff's cruiser joined the scene. Robert Martinez stepped out in full uniform, not as a worried father, but as a man in authority. "Sergeant," he began, his tone smooth but heavy with command, "this is a family matter. My son made a mistake, but we'll handle it privately. No need for paperwork. No paperwork. For drunk driving. For property damage. For endangering lives." Sergeant Williams stood tall. "With respect, Sheriff, this isn't a family matter. It's a matter of public safety." That's when a mask slipped. The sheriff stepped closer, his voice turning hard. "Sergeant, you work for me. I run this county. My son walks away tonight, or you'll be writing parking tickets by morning." Now, that's where most men fold. But Sergeant Williams didn't. He did what every honest officer dreams of doing when power tries to twist the law. He refused. He filed the charges. He documented the sheriff's interference word for word. And that act of courage, one officer refusing to bend, started a ripple that reached my courtroom 2 days later. Tuesday morning, 9:30 a.m. Courtroom 3. I'd reviewed the case file earlier that day, sipping strong black coffee. Something about it felt heavier than usual, like there was more to this story than numbers on paper. When Derek Martinez walked in, the room seemed to hold its breath. He wasn't dressed like a defendant. Designer jacket, spotless sneakers, confidence pouring off him like perfume. But it wasn't the clothes. It was the smirk. The kind that says, "I know who my father is, and I know what that means." I'd seen that look before. From politicians, businessmen, even lawyers who forgot what justice means. But never from a boy so young. Derek Martinez, my clerk called out, charged with driving under the influence, property damage, reckless driving, and resisting arrest. He strolled up like he was checking into a hotel. Didn't make eye contact. Didn't bow his head. Just looked around, amused. "Mr. Martinez," I said, "you understand these charges?" "Yeah," he replied, leaning on the table like it was casual conversation. "But I think there's been a mistake. My dad already spoke to people about this. It's just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding." That word echoed through the courtroom like an insult. "Mr. Martinez," I said slowly, "you were driving at 40 in a 25 zone, under the influence, and you destroyed someone's property. What part of that is a misunderstanding?" He smirked again. "The part where I get treated like some random criminal. You don't know who my father is, right?" That's when time seemed to freeze. Every person in that courtroom knew what was coming next. The arrogance, the entitlement, the quiet threat. Yes, Mr. Martinez, I said. I know exactly who your father is. The question is, do you know who I am? He leaned back. Sure. You're a city judge. My dad runs the whole county. Different levels, you know. Different levels. That sentence hit harder than he realized. Because when a young man believes justice comes in levels, one for the powerful, one for the rest, that's not arrogance. That's rot. And that rot starts somewhere close to home. I could feel the courtroom waiting, every heartbeat heavy with tension. And then he said it. Judge, he laughed, you're powerless. My dad controls all the cops, all the evidence, all the jails. You can't touch me. You're just a guy in a robe pretending to have authority. The words hung in the air like poison. Powerless. I'd heard insults before. I'd been challenged, mocked, even threatened. But never, not once, had anyone dared to call justice powerless to its face. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate. And then I stood up. Mr. Martinez, I said softly, I'm going to show you exactly what real power looks like. That line was the spark. The story that followed would set off a storm. Because when the son of the sheriff tells a judge he's above the law, the whole county listens. When power challenges justice. He said I was powerless. And for a long second, I just looked at him, really looked at him. Because I wasn't staring at a drunk kid anymore. I was staring at a generation of entitlement. A mirror reflecting every father who had ever told his son, the rules don't apply to us. The courtroom was silent. You could almost hear hearts beating. Even the ceiling fan seemed to pause. Behind him, people shifted in their seats. Some shook their heads. Others whispered prayers under their breath. They all knew something had just changed. I leaned forward, my hands resting on the bench. Mr. Martinez, I said quietly, you think your father's badge makes you untouchable? He shrugged, that same grin still plastered on his face. It's not about the badge, Judge. It's about reality. My father controls everything that matters. There was the pure, unfiltered arrogance of someone raised in the shadow of power. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't bang the gavel. I'd learned long ago that the quietest words often carry the loudest consequences. Son, I said, you're standing in a courtroom, not your father's office. And here, everyone stands equal, from the sheriff to the street sweeper. He chuckled. That's cute, Judge. But you'll see. My father fixes things. He always does. And that was the moment I realized the real trial wasn't about a DUI. It wasn't about a mailbox or a blood alcohol number. It was about whether the law still meant something in a world that worships connections over character. The next day, my clerk told me Sheriff Martinez wanted a private meeting. That phrase always raises alarms. Powerful people never ask for private meetings unless they're about to test the limits of justice. He arrived 15 minutes later, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp, every medal perfectly aligned. Judge, he began with a politician's smile, thank you for seeing me. I wanted to clear up a misunderstanding regarding my son. There was again that word, misunderstanding. Sheriff, I replied, your son was arrested for driving under the influence and property damage. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a crime. He sighed, his tone soft, almost fatherly. With all due respect, Judge, Derek's a good kid. He just made a mistake. Surely we can keep this off his record. A suspension, community service, something quiet. Quiet, I repeated. You want justice to be quiet. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said it all. That's when I realized how deep this ran. He wasn't just protecting his son. He was protecting the illusion that power could erase consequences. Sheriff, I said, if I gave your son a pass because of your position, I'd be telling every citizen that law enforcement families live by different rules. Do you really want that message out there? He leaned forward slightly. Judge, I've kept this county safe for 25 years. You and I both know relationships matter. Surely, a man of your experience understands that. I do, I said, and that's exactly why I won't dishonor them. For the first time, the smile cracked. His voice turned colder. Judge, I control law enforcement in this county. Without my cooperation, your court doesn't function. There was the veiled threat, polished like a badge. And right then, I made a decision. I wouldn't just uphold the law. I'd remind this county what it stands for. That afternoon, I ordered Derek's case to be heard in open session. No private deals, no closed chambers. I wanted the public to see what justice looks like when it refuses to kneel. Word spread fast. By the next morning, the courtroom was packed. Police officers, reporters, even city officials. Everyone wanted to see how far the judge would go against the sheriff's son. When Derek walked in, the smirk was gone, replaced by nervous defiance. But his father was there too, standing in the back row, arms crossed, a storm behind his eyes. "Mr. Martinez, I began. You said yesterday that I'm powerless. Would you like to repeat that today?" He hesitated. "I was just frustrated." I nodded. Understandable. Frustration makes us say things we don't mean. But sometimes it reveals what we really believe. Then I leaned forward. "Do you still believe that your father's position places you above accountability?" He swallowed. The arrogance was fading, but pride still held him upright. "I believe my father does what he has to do to protect his family." "And what about protecting the law?" I asked. He didn't answer. That silence was powerful, because for the first time, he realized that his father's influence couldn't save him here. I continued, "Mr. Martinez, you're facing charges that could carry jail time. Yet, you speak of protection instead of responsibility. Tell me, what lesson does that teach a community watching this unfold?" He looked away, and that's when I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't sure if his father could shield him anymore. But the sheriff wasn't done yet. As I prepared to announce sentencing, I saw movement in the back of the courtroom. The sheriff stepped forward, whispering something to his attorney. Moments later, a motion arrived at my desk, a formal request to recuse me from the case, claiming personal bias. It was a last-minute ambush, a desperate attempt to derail justice. I looked up at him. "Sheriff, are you questioning this court's integrity?" He didn't blink. "I'm protecting my son from a judge who's made up his mind." The crowd murmured. Every officer in the room stiffened. The air was electric with tension. "Sheriff," I said evenly, "the only thing I've made up my mind about is that no man, regardless of uniform or bloodline, stand above the law." That's when it happened. Derek turned toward his father. "Dad, stop," he said softly. For a second, he wasn't the sheriff's son, just a scared young man caught between loyalty and truth. But his father's pride was too heavy to let go. "Don't say another word," the sheriff ordered. That's the tragedy of arrogance. It silences humility before it can grow. The motion was denied. The sheriff's glare burned through me as he stormed out of the courtroom. And at that moment, I knew the real battle had begun. Not between a judge and a defendant, but between justice and power, between a father's influence and a son's conscience. That night, my clerk asked, "Judge, aren't you worried what he might do?" I smiled faintly. Worried? Maybe. But I've spent my whole life proving one thing: justice doesn't bow. It stands. And deep down, I could sense it, the calm before the storm. Because when powerful men lose control, they don't surrender quietly. Something told me the sheriff hadn't learned his lesson yet. And neither had his son. But soon they would. They would both learn what real power means. Not the kind you inherit, not the kind pinned to a chest, but the kind that lives in the truth you can't silence. The sheriff's shadow. It's a strange feeling when justice starts to tremble under the weight of influence. You can't see it. You can't touch it. But you can feel it, like a storm pressing against the courthouse windows before a single drop of rain falls. That week, I began to feel that pressure building around me. Anonymous calls at night. Silent hangs. A reporter waiting outside the courthouse asking if I was waging war against the sheriff's family. I wasn't waging war. I was upholding the law. But when you stand against a powerful man in a small county, even the truth can look like rebellion. By Wednesday morning, whispers were everywhere. "Did you hear? The sheriff's furious. They say he's pulling strings. They say the judge is going too far." That's how corruption works. Not with explosions, but with whispers. It doesn't attack head-on. It seeps in quietly, hoping to make you doubt yourself. That afternoon, my clerk, Elena, stepped into my office with a worried look. Judge, someone tried to access the case file last night, she said. My hand froze over the paperwork. From where? Sheriff's Department server. Someone deleted the dash cam footage. I took a slow breath. Was it recovered? Not yet. IT is trying. A case like this lives and dies on evidence. If the dash cam was gone, so was the visual proof of Derek's condition at the scene. And just like that, the sheriff had made his first real move. I knew what I had to do. I called the state attorney general's office. Send a copy of every arrest record, every report, and every video related to this case to my chambers, I said, and make sure it's backed up outside the county server. The man on the other end hesitated. Judge, you think the sheriff. I don't think, I interrupted. I know. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk long after midnight, reading the sergeant's report again and again. It was meticulous. Timestamps, witness statements, breathalyzer data, photos of the crash. But it was more than paperwork. It was proof that honesty still had a pulse in this county. Thursday morning, Derek appeared again for a procedural hearing. He looked pale, not defiant, just uneasy. His father wasn't there this time. Mr. Martinez, I began, your case continues next week. Are you ready to proceed? He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. I paused. Something in his tone had changed. The arrogance was slipping. He wasn't the same boy who'd laughed in my courtroom, but he was still trapped in his father's shadow. Before I could dismiss him, he spoke again. Judge, may I ask something? Of course. Do you really think the law is stronger than family? The question stopped me, because it wasn't rebellion in his voice, it was pain. I leaned forward. Family is sacred, son. But when family asks you to betray what's right, it's not love anymore. It's control. He looked down, his jaw tightening. Then he whispered, You don't know my father. He was right, but I was about to. The next day, things escalated. I received a call from the mayor's office. Judge, listen, the mayor said carefully, Sheriff Martinez has been calling council members, saying you're making this personal. He's hinting that your position might be reevaluated. I smiled bitterly. Reevaluated? For enforcing the law. Judge, he's got friend in high places. Maybe just ease off. Let the kid do probation. No jail. Quiet resolution. I set down the phone slowly. Mayor, justice doesn't negotiate. It delivers. Then I hung up. I could almost hear my father's voice in that silence. Son, the day you start making deals with the truth, you lose more than your job. You lose your soul. By now, the sheriff was running out of patience. Friday morning, his SUV pulled up in front of the courthouse. He didn't come inside. He waited, dark glasses, jaw tight, radio crackling at his side. I watched from my window. The man was drowning in pride, and he didn't even see it. He thought fear could rewrite the law. He thought wrong. Later that afternoon, Sergeant Williams walked into my chambers. Judge, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. The sheriff called me last night. My stomach tightened. What did he say? He offered me a promotion, then told me to reconsider my report. Said if I withdrew it, no one would ever know. I studied his face, and I told him no, sir. There was again courage. The kind that never makes headlines, but keeps a nation from falling apart. Sergeant, I said, you did the right thing. But be careful. He won't stop here. He nodded. I'm not afraid of losing my job, Judge. I'm afraid of losing my integrity. Those words stayed with me all night. Saturday came, and with it the breaking point. A reporter released a leaked memo claiming the court had personal vendettas against law enforcement families. My office received hundreds of calls, some supportive, others venomous. Even my own colleagues started whispering, maybe it's time to recuse yourself. Maybe step aside, let the state handle it. But I couldn't, because if I stepped aside, I'd be proving Derek right, that the system bends when power pushes hard enough. So I stayed. That evening, my phone rang again. Private number. I answered. Judge, a low voice said, This is Sheriff Martinez. I didn't reply. You're making a mistake, he continued. I'm offering you a way out. Drop the sentence, seal the record, and we can move forward peacefully. You have no idea what doors I can open for you. And if I don't, his tone sharpened. Then I'll show you what happens when a man in uniform loses patience. Click. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the gavel on my desk. That little piece of wood carved decades ago by my mentor had seen countless cases, thieves, liars, even killers. But that night, it felt heavier than ever, because I realized something chilling. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals wear badges instead of masks. By Sunday morning, I made my choice. I called the state police. "Put me on record," I said. "If anything happens to me, or if evidence disappears again, I want this documented." The sheriff is obstructing justice. The officer on the other end hesitated. "That's serious, Judge. So is corruption." And just like that, the tension reached its boiling point. The sheriff had crossed lines he couldn't uncross. His son was trapped between guilt and obedience. And I was standing alone against the storm. But as I looked at the sunlight breaking through the courthouse windows, I remembered something my father once told me. Real power isn't what you can control, son. It's what you refuse to compromise. And I knew what had to come next. The day of judgment wasn't far away. And this time, the gavel would fall louder than the badge could echo. When pride meets judgment. The morning of the hearing felt heavier than usual. Clouds hung low over the courthouse, the kind that threaten rain, but never quite release it. Even nature seemed to understand that something was about to break. When I arrived, the corridors were already buzzing. Reporters lined the steps, deputies whispered in corners, and people crowded the benches just to catch a glimpse of what many were calling the trial that could break the county. But for me, it wasn't about spectacle. It was about a single truth. Justice had to mean the same thing for everyone, even the sheriff's family. At 9 a.m. sharp, Derek entered the courtroom. This time, he wasn't wearing expensive clothes. He wore a simple white shirt and a look I hadn't seen before. Fear. Behind him, the sheriff followed, still in uniform, his silver badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights like it wanted to remind everyone who held power here. The tension was suffocating. Every step they took echoed through the silent room. As Derek stood before me, I could feel the weight of his father's eyes burning into both of us. "Mr. Martinez," I began, "today we decide whether the law still stands tall in this county. Are you ready to proceed?" Derek's voice shook slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." Before I could continue, the sheriff stepped forward. "Judge, I'd like to make a statement before you proceed." I paused. "This is your son's hearing, Sheriff, not yours." "With respect," he said, the word respect sounding more like a warning than courtesy. "This entire matter has gone far enough. You've turned a minor incident into a political crusade." "Minor incident?" I repeated. "Your son was intoxicated, endangered lives, and you attempted to obstruct justice. That's not minor, Sheriff. That's criminal." The room went still. You could feel hearts tighten. He took a step closer. "Be careful, Judge. You're walking into dangerous territory." I met his eyes. "The only danger here is a man who believes his uniform is stronger than the Constitution." A few gasps filled the room. The sheriff's face darkened. Just then, my clerk brought in a sealed envelope. "Your Honor," she whispered, "state investigators sent this overnight." I opened it and began reading silently. Inside was the restored dashcam footage, the one that had disappeared. It showed everything. Derek stumbling, slurring, failing his sobriety test, and the sheriff arriving later in full uniform demanding his son's release. The evidence was crystal clear. I looked up. "Mr. Martinez, this footage." But before I could finish, the sheriff's voice thundered, "That video was illegally obtained." "Illegally obtained?" I replied. "Your department tried to delete it." His jaw tightened. "You can't prove that." I leaned forward. "Actually, I can. The state forensics team traced the deletion attempt to your office login." "Care to explain that, Sheriff?" The silence that followed was heavy, alive with disbelief. For the first time, the sheriff didn't speak. That's when Derek broke down. "Dad, stop," he said quietly. "It's over." The sheriff turned sharply. "What did you just say?" Tears filled the boy's eyes. I said stop. "You're making it worse." "Son," he hissed, "you let me handle this." "No, Dad." Derek's voice cracked, echoing through the courtroom. "I'm the one who drove drunk. I'm the one who messed up. You can't keep fixing things." You could feel the shift. the raw collapse of a family built on pride. For the first time, the young man wasn't protected by power. He was standing on his own, trembling but honest. I spoke softly. "Mr. Martinez, you don't have to protect anyone else. Just tell the truth." Derek wiped his face. "Your Honor, my dad, he told me to say it was a misunderstanding. He said he'd handle it, but I knew I was guilty." His father slammed his fist on the bench beside him. "Enough." I raised my gavel. "Sheriff Martinez, one more outburst, and I'll have you removed from this courtroom." He glared at me. "You can't remove me from anything, Judge." I looked him dead in the eye. "Bailiff, escort the sheriff outside." The entire courtroom froze. Two deputies hesitated. They worked for him, after all. But then, slowly, one of them stepped forward. "Sir," the deputy said quietly, "please come with us." For the first time in 25 years, Sheriff Robert Martinez looked small, because power built on fear only works until courage walks into the room. As they let him out, Derek collapsed into his chair, head in his hands. When the doors closed behind his father, I finally spoke. "Mr. Martinez," I said gently, "this courtroom doesn't exist to destroy families. It exists to restore integrity. And the first step toward that is accountability." He nodded, silent tears running down his cheeks. But the sheriff wasn't done. Moments later, the courtroom doors burst open. He stormed back in, defiant, eyes blazing. "You think this ends here?" he shouted. "You think your little gavel scares me? I run this county." The bailiffs moved instantly, blocking his path. "Sheriff, I warned, stand down." He kept shouting, voice echoing like thunder. "You're finished. I'll have you off that bench by morning." I slammed the gavel. "Contempt of court, Sheriff. One more word, and I'll hold you personally accountable." The room erupted into chaos. Officers shouting, reporters snapping photos, and Derek crying out, "Dad, please." And then silence. Because in that moment, the sheriff realized what he'd done. He had turned his own courtroom presence, his badge, his authority, into a weapon against justice itself. I took a deep breath. "Sheriff Robert Martinez," I said clearly, "you are hereby charged with obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and contempt of court." He froze. "You can't." I just did. When the bailiffs cuffed him, the sound of those metal clicks cut through the air like thunder. The same sound as deputies had heard 100 times before, but this time it was their own leader in chains. As they led him away, Derek wept silently, whispering, "I'm sorry, Dad." I watched him go, feeling the weight of years pressing down. Because no matter how right justice feels, it always hurts when truth tears through bloodlines. That day, the courtroom didn't feel victorious. It felt cleansed, like something heavy had finally been lifted off the town. When the last spectator left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the empty witness stand. Because I knew this wasn't just a legal victory. It was a test of faith. Faith that in a world where corruption wears a badge, integrity still has a voice. And I had chosen to use mine. The day justice spoke louder than fear. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the courthouse windows like a quiet promise. But beneath that calm, I could still feel yesterday's chaos vibrating in the walls. News had spread overnight. The sheriff arrested by his own court. Every radio station, every local headline carried those words. Some called it justice. Others called it betrayal. I called it necessary. When I walked into the courtroom, the crowd had doubled. Officers stood shoulder to shoulder in the back, uncertain which side history would place them on. Reporters scribbled. Citizens held their breath. And right in the middle sat Derek Martinez, no longer the arrogant boy I'd met, but a young man hollowed by consequence. "Court is now in session," I said, my voice steady but weighted. The bailiff escorted Sheriff Robert Martinez to the stand. Gone was the confident lawman. His uniform now looked like armor that no longer fit. He avoided his son's eyes. "Sheriff Martinez," I began, "you stand accused of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and contempt of court. Do you understand the charges?" He nodded, barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" A long silence. Then, in a voice stripped of thunder, he whispered, "I did what any father would do." The room murmured. I'll let the words hang there, because that sentence, simple and heartbreaking, revealed the truth that destroys good men. They confuse love with control. Sheriff, I said gently, a father protects his child by teaching him accountability, not by erasing it. You try to save him from consequences, and in doing so, you both lost yourselves. He looked up, eyes glistening. I was scared for him. I know, I replied, but fear is never an excuse to silence justice. Then I turned to Derek. Mr. Martinez, you pleaded guilty to driving under the influence, property damage, and reckless endangerment. Do you accept responsibility? Yes, Your Honor. And are you prepared to face the full sentence under the law? He hesitated only a second. Yes. At that moment, I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen since this began. Humility. The kind that doesn't come from defeat, but from awakening. I took a breath. Derek Martinez, for your actions you were sentenced to 90 days in county custody, 6 months license suspension, $1,000 in fines, and 40 hours of community service. You will attend mandatory alcohol education and speak at 2 youth programs about the dangers of reckless behavior. He nodded silently. Then I turned back to the father. Sheriff Robert Martinez, the court finds you guilty of obstruction of justice and tampering with public evidence. You are hereby sentenced to 18 months in state custody and permanent removal from office. The gasp that followed seemed to draw every molecule of air out of the room. No one expected a man once praised as the protector of the county to leave wearing handcuffs. But before the deputies moved, I spoke once more. I'm not your enemy, Sheriff. I'm the mirror you spent your life avoiding. You taught this community to respect the badge. Now, through your mistakes, you'll teach them to respect the truth behind it. He lowered his head, and for the first time in decades, the man who once commanded fear stood silent before the law he had sworn to uphold. As they led him away, Derek called out softly, Dad, I'm sorry. The sheriff turned just enough to meet his son's eyes. For a flicker of a second, the rage was gone. Only love, bruised and wordless, remained. That small exchange did more to heal the room than any verdict I could have spoken. After they were gone, the courtroom remained still, heavy with realization. I looked around at the faces, officers, citizens, parents. No one smiled. Because justice, when it's real, doesn't celebrate. It teaches. I clear my throat. This case is not about one family. It's about every citizen who has ever wondered whether justice still belongs to them. Today, we prove that law and truth still outweigh title and bloodline. That afternoon, the county news ran one final headline. Judge delivers historic ruling, law above power. For once, it wasn't scandal that filled the airwaves. It was respect. People stopped me on the street, shaking my hand, some with tears in their eyes. Not because a sheriff was punished, but because they saw proof that the system could still be trusted. A week later, I visited the community center where Derek had begun his service hours. He was cleaning tables, sleeves rolled up, listening to teenagers share stories of loss and mistakes. When he noticed me, he froze. Your Honor, he said quietly, I didn't expect you to come. I wanted to see how you're doing. He nodded. I'm learning, sir. I thought power was about control. Turns out, it's about courage, the courage to admit when you're wrong. I smiled. That's the kind of power this world needs more of. Later that evening, as I locked my office and stepped outside, the courthouse looked different, lighter somehow. The rain that had threatened all week finally began to fall, washing the steps clean. It felt like the county itself was exhaling. Because in that moment, everyone, judge, officer, father, son, had been reminded of one sacred truth. Power is not inherited. It's earned by standing on the side of what's right, even when it costs you everything. The true meaning of power. The courthouse feels different when justice has done its work. The air gets a little quieter. The walls, heavy with all the stories they've witnessed, seem to stand taller, prouder. Weeks had passed since the Martinez case, but its echo lingered. People still talked about it in barbershops, in coffee lines, in late-night radio calls. Some said I'd gone too far. Others said I'd saved the county's soul. But for me, It wasn't about punishment or praise. It was about restoring faith in law, in fairness in ourselves. One morning, I received a letter. It was handwritten, the penmanship uneven, but the message clear. Judge, I used to think the law only worked for people with power. After watching what you did, I realized it works for all of us. Thank you for reminding me that truth still has a place in this world. I read that letter twice. Then I placed it inside my desk drawer, right beside my father's old pocket watch, the one he gave me when I first took the bench. He used to say, "Son, time will test every man's integrity. When it does, let yours stand the test." And for the first time in a long time, I felt I had honored that promise. Months later, I saw Derek again. He came in my chambers quietly. No cameras, no fanfare. He looked older somehow, not by years, but by understanding. "Your Honor," he said, "I finished my sentence. I'm volunteering now at the youth program full-time. They offer me a position as a counselor." "That's good to hear," I said with a smile. "And your father?" He lowered his gaze. "He's serving his time. He writes to me every week. He says prisons taught him more about justice than 25 years in uniform ever did." I nodded slowly. Sometimes, the hardest lessons become the ones that heal us most. He took a deep breath. "I used to think you ruined our lives. Now I see you saved them." After he left, I sat in silence. The sun was setting beyond the courthouse steps, painting the sky in gold and crimson. And I thought about how fragile justice really is, how it depends not on power, but on people brave enough to defend it. Because real power isn't in the badge. It isn't in the gavel. It isn't even in the courtroom. Real power lives in the courage to choose what's right when it's hardest to do so. A few months later, the county swore in its new sheriff, Captain Rodriguez, the same officer who had refused to look away when corruption tried to hide. He stopped by my chambers before his first day on duty. "Judge," he said, "I just want you to know, because of what you did, we've changed how we train new deputies. Every recruit learns one rule first. The law doesn't serve power. Power serves the law." I smiled. "That's how it should be." He nodded. "That's how it will stay." That night, I walked through the empty courtroom one last time before heading home. I let my hand rest on the bench, the same one where I'd been called powerless. And I whispered, "Powerless, huh?" Because sometimes the quiet truth is the loudest victory of all. Justice had spoken, and for once, the whole world listened. Final moral message. Power without integrity collapses. Authority without humility corrupts. But justice, true justice, stands eternal, even when everything else falls apart. The sheriff's badge tarnished. The judge's gavel endured. And the son who once mocked the law became its defender. That's the beauty of accountability. It breaks before it builds. It hurts before it heals. But in the end, it always restores. Collision High Retention SEO Optimized CTA Call to Action. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll just yet. Backend Index Pointing Right subscribe for more true courtroom stories that remind us why honesty still matters. Speech Balloon share this video to show the world that no one, not even the powerful, stand above justice. Red Heart, comment below. What does real power mean to you? Your voice matters, because justice begins with people who care enough to listen. Direct Hit, this was the true meaning of power. A story of justice, redemption, and the courage to stand when others bow. Until next time, remember, power fades, but truth never does.